You know that feeling when you smile even though you're exhausted? When you say it's fine even though it isn't? When you go out of your way again for someone who never really sees you? It's not just kindness, it's survival. Because somewhere along the way, being nice became your identity. Not because it's who you are, but because it's who the world rewards. The good one, the reliable one, the one who doesn't make a fuss. But behind the niceness, quiet resentment, chronic fatigue, the strange sense that you're disappearing, that you're a guest in your own life. This isn't a rant against kindness. It's a quiet unveiling of the subtle self-destruction hidden in always being agreeable. This video is not for the loud. It's for the ones who've learned to swallow their voice just to keep the peace. You don't have to explode to fall apart. Sometimes you just erode, slowly, politely. The smile that hides the silence. It usually starts early. You learn to say thank you even when you're not grateful. You're taught to share even when it hurts. You're praised when you sit quietly, rewarded when you're agreeable, and reminded, often without words, that being easy to handle is more important than being fully alive. You watch the adults around you flinch at anger, recoil at sadness, and beam at politeness. And so, like a good student, you learn to read the room before you learn to read yourself. Being nice becomes a strategy, not a virtue, a survival mechanism disguised as personality. You learn that your needs are optional, but harmony is sacred. You begin to monitor your tone, filter your thoughts, rehearse your sentences. Not to connect, but to avoid conflict, to stay liked, to keep the peace. But peace like that is expensive. It costs you authenticity, it costs you voice, it costs you the slow, quiet erosion of your inner world. At first, it's barely noticeable. You're the one everyone turns to. You get compliments for your emotional maturity. You become the designated listener, the peacemaker, the helper. People say you're so good with others. What they don't say is that they've gotten used to you being invisible. What they don't ask is how you're doing, really doing, because they assume you're always okay. You've trained them to believe that. You even start to believe it yourself. You wear your niceness like armor. You convince yourself that being easygoing makes you virtuous, that self-denial is a sign of strength, that biting your tongue is an act of love. But under the surface, the pressure builds. You get tired, emotionally, physically, spiritually. You say yes too often, stay too long, give too much. And at night, when things go quiet, a small voice whispers, "Why do I feel so empty?" And it's confusing because everyone likes you. No one's mad. You haven't done anything wrong, but that's exactly the point. You haven't done anything real either. You've become a mirror, reflecting what people want to see, but slowly forgetting your own face. You start to feel disconnected, not from others, but from yourself. You laugh, but it doesn't feel joyful. You agree, but it doesn't feel true. You show up, but it doesn't feel like you who showed up. It's a version of you, a polished, palatable version. One that doesn't ruffle feathers. One that doesn't get too loud, too sad, too weird. One that fits in perfectly by carving yourself into pieces. And here's the thing no one tells you. People-pleasing is not about kindness. It's about fear. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of not being enough. You're not saying yes because you want to. You're saying yes because you're terrified of what will happen if you don't. But the real tragedy is this. The more you bend to fit in, the more you confirm the belief that your real self isn't lovable. And so the performance continues. You become fluent in small talk, allergic to confrontation, addicted to being needed. And when someone finally asks, "What do you want?" you pause, because you genuinely don't know. Carl Jung called this the betrayal of the self. When the persona, the social mask we wear, becomes so fused with our identity that we forget there's someone underneath. That mask isn't evil. It helps you survive. But the longer you wear it, the harder it becomes to take off. And when you try, when you dare to express an honest no, or a boundary, or a need, you feel guilt. That sharp, stomach-turning guilt that whispers, "You're being difficult, you're letting people down, you're not nice anymore." But that guilt, it's not a moral compass, it's a leash, a chain forged in childhood. And every time you listen to it, you tighten the knot between who you are and who you were told to be. So you keep being nice. You keep absorbing the discomfort so others don't have to. You keep breaking yourself into bite-sized pieces so no one chokes on your truth. And slowly, the cost becomes unbearable. Resentment grows, exhaustion deepens, and still you smile. Because what else can you do? You were never taught that being loved for your full self was possible. Only that being tolerated for your edited self was safe. And here's where the heartbreak really lives. You don't even know what would happen if you stopped. If you stopped smiling when you're sad. If you stopped helping when you're empty. If you stopped pretending everything's fine. Would people still like you? Would anyone stay? And more importantly, would you stay? Would you still recognize yourself in the mirror if the approval disappeared? These are not easy questions, but they're necessary ones. Because every yes that betrays your truth is a tiny death. And over time, those add up. Being nice doesn't destroy you all at once. It destroys you slowly, through 1,000 small silences, through the moments you abandon yourself in the name of politeness, through the nights you lie awake wondering why being good feels so bad. And maybe, just maybe, you're starting to wonder too. The world loves you. When you're easy to love, the world is very comfortable with your niceness. It benefits from it. It thrives on people who don't make demands, who don't take up too much space, who smile even when they're tired. There's something almost addictive about being the easy one, the one who gets praised for how well they handle pressure, the one who's so thoughtful, so mature, so understanding. Translation? You never make anyone uncomfortable, and comfort is currency. Not your comfort, of course, theirs. You learn quickly that emotional labor is rewarded, not with healing, but with validation. You become the unpaid therapist, the emotional sponge, the fixer. You listen to everyone's pain while folding your own into something small and manageable. You make room for everyone's chaos while quietly sweeping up your own. And the world claps for you, because a nice person is a convenient person. You're not messy. You're not unpredictable. You're not a problem to solve. You solve problems. You absorb tension. You keep things smooth. But here's the twist. People aren't really loving you. They're loving the service you provide, the illusion you maintain, the calm you offer at your own expense. And deep down, you know it. You know that if you stopped being nice, if you said what you really thought, felt what you really felt, asked for what you truly needed, you might lose some of that praise. You might get labeled difficult, dramatic, selfish. And so, you stay in character. You keep performing. Because the threat of being unloved feels worse than the pain of self-abandonment. It's a harsh economy of affection. You trade authenticity for approval. And the longer you do it, the more your identity gets wrapped up in the transaction. You start to think, maybe this is just who I am. Maybe I'm just the helper, the calm one, the selfless one. But selfless is a dangerous word. It sounds noble, it sounds spiritual, but what it really means if you break it down is without self. And when you live without self for too long, your soul begins to starve. You find yourself in rooms where your laughter feels scripted, in friendships where you do all the emotional heavy lifting, in relationships where love is conditional on your compliance. And even as you feel yourself fading, you keep going, because stopping would mean confrontation. And confrontation feels like violence when you've been trained to keep the peace at any cost, even when that cost is your joy. Nietzsche once said that he who despises himself still respects himself as one who despises. In other words, even our self-erasure gives us a kind of twisted pride. We feel noble for suffering quietly. We feel virtuous for never asking too much. We take pride in how much we can endure. But what if endurance isn't the goal? What if the point of life isn't to be as tolerable as possible? What if you're not here to make everyone else comfortable? It's a radical thought, almost offensive to some, especially to the people who benefit from your silence. Because once you stop being nice, the people who were closest to your performance begin to panic. They say you've changed, that you're not like you used to be, that you're cold, distant, moody. But what they really mean is, you're not accommodating my dysfunction anymore. And that's the moment of reckoning. That's when you realize just how conditional most love actually is. How many of your relationships were built not on truth but on your ability to hide it? How many people only felt safe with you when you were suppressing yourself? And the grief hits you, not because you were wrong to be kind, but because you thought kindness meant shrinking. It doesn't. Kindness without boundaries is just self-betrayal dressed in a smile. It looks good on the outside, but it rots you from the inside. And by the time you notice, the damage has already begun. Your body starts to keep score. Fatigue, anxiety, resentment, even illness. Not out of punishment, but out of protest. Your system can only carry so much unspoken truth before it starts breaking down. Your nervous system wasn't built for constant appeasement. Your heart wasn't meant to be used like a cushion for other people's sharp edges. So why do you keep doing it? Because being nice has become a way of surviving. A role so deeply ingrained, you don't even question it anymore. You just keep playing it. Smiling on cue, softening your tone, editing yourself mid-sentence so you don't sound too intense, apologizing when you haven't done anything wrong. And here's the most devastating part. People don't even notice. They don't realize how much you're holding in, how many times you swallow your truth because you make it look effortless. You've mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight, but that's not your destiny. You were not put on this earth to be palatable. You were not born to be agreeable. You were born to be whole, complex, honest, alive. And being alive means sometimes being inconvenient. It means disrupting the peace when the peace is fake. It means having hard conversations, saying no, letting people down, and trusting that the people who truly love you will survive your truth. You don't have to burn yourself to keep others warm. You don't have to be the one who always says yes. You can choose you, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a quiet, sacred one. The kind of choosing that says, I exist too, I matter too, and I'm done disappearing. Losing the mask, meeting yourself. At some point, the performance becomes unbearable. Not because you've run out of things to give, but because you've run out of space to breathe. You wake up one day and realize you don't actually know who you are without the niceness. It's not just something you do anymore. It's who you've become. And that's when the real unraveling begins. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. If you've spent most of your life trying to be liked, you probably never gave yourself permission to be real. The real you, the angry, messy, contradictory, tender, selfish, emotional you, has been buried under layers of good behavior, self-monitoring, and carefully managed smiles. You've been so focused on being acceptable that you forgot how to be whole. And wholeness isn't tidy, it's not polite, it's not always likable. Wholeness includes the parts of you were told to hide, the parts that got you labeled too much, too sensitive, too emotional, the parts that scared people or threatened them or made them uncomfortable. You learned to trade those parts for safety, for love, or at least for what looked like love. But now something in you is stirring. You're starting to feel the cost of the bargain, and suddenly niceness doesn't feel noble anymore. It feels hollow, and the mask, once comforting, now feels suffocating. But here's where things get tricky. Taking it off, stepping into your truth, doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like chaos, like identity loss, like walking naked into a room where everyone else is fully clothed. Because when you've performed a role for long enough, authenticity can feel like rebellion. You begin to question everything. What do I actually want? What do I enjoy? Who do I trust? Even small things. What clothes you wear, how you speak, what you tolerate, begin to feel like choices rather than defaults. And that's terrifying, because it means you have to take responsibility for yourself in a new way. You can't just blame other people for walking all over you. You have to admit that you left the door open, that you trained them to expect your silence. But that realization, painful as it is also the beginning of something holy. Carl Jung wrote extensively about the shadow, the unconscious parts of ourselves we reject or repress. The nice person often has a massive shadow, full of anger, resentment, need, and power. Not because they're bad, but because those traits weren't allowed. So they got pushed down, banished into the unconscious, where they fester. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It leaks out, in passive aggression, in burnout, in bitterness, in those quiet moments when you snap and then apologize for existing. Your shadow wants integration, not punishment. It wants to be welcomed home. But integration is hard when your entire identity has been built around self-denial. The first time you say no and mean it, your whole body might shake. The first time you disappoint someone on purpose, you might feel sick. The first time you express a need without justifying it, You might cry, not because you did something wrong, but because you're finally undoing years of self-erasure. And the grief that comes with that, it's real. You grieve the time you lost, the friendships that only loved your mask, the opportunities you missed because you were too busy being accommodating. You grieve the younger version of you who thought this was the only way to survive, and it hurts. But it also heals. Because grief, real grief, is a sign that something true is surfacing. That you're beginning to take yourself seriously, not as a product, not as a peacekeeper, but as a person, a full living person with needs, limits, boundaries, and a soul. And it's messy. People might not like the new you, they might not recognize you anymore, but maybe that's the point. Maybe you're not here to be recognizable. Maybe you're here to be real. And realness isn't always cute. It doesn't always get applause. It doesn't always win friends. But it does something better. It roots you. It gives you a sense of self that can't be shaken by someone else's disappointment. Because here's the thing. The more real you become, the more you realize how many of your relationships were based on performance. And that's a hard pill to swallow. But it's also a clean break. A line in the sand between who you were pretending to be and who you actually are. And who you are. That person is still emerging. They don't always have the right words. They might stumble, hesitate, say too much or too little. But they're honest, they're here. They're trying, and that's enough. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy. You don't have to be palatable to be loved. You don't have to be agreeable to be good. You just have to show up as you. Without the script, without the smile that hides the ache, without the exhausting performance of fine. Because the truth is, you were never meant to disappear. You were meant to burn, to feel, to speak, to live. Not nicely, but fully. The lie that safety comes from being liked. There's a lie that gets whispered so softly into your childhood that you mistake it for truth. If you are good, if you are pleasant, agreeable, polite, then the world will love you, protect you, and keep you safe. That if you make yourself easy to be around, people will never leave. That love is something you earn by being convenient. You don't remember exactly when you started believing it, but you remember how it felt, when you got praised for not crying too loud, for sharing when it hurt, for smiling through the discomfort. You learned that your warmth could keep others from going cold, and so you made it your job to be warm all the time. It's a beautiful fantasy, but it's just that, a fantasy. Because niceness, the kind that's born from fear, doesn't keep you safe, it keeps you small. It makes you forget that safety built on performance is not safety at all. It's a prison with velvet walls. It's a mask that's so convincing even you forget it's not your face. This is the deeper tragedy of being nice. It convinces you that survival depends on suppression, that if you speak too loudly, say no too clearly, or want too visibly, you'll be punished. And maybe you will, maybe you were. Maybe you learned the hard way that being honest made people withdraw, that being expressive got you labeled dramatic, that standing up for yourself was met with silence, or worse, shame. So you adapted, you folded inward, you perfected the art of being liked. But being liked is not the same as being known. Being liked means people enjoy the version of you that's been carefully curated for their comfort. Being known means they see the full spectrum of your humanity and still choose to stay. But here's the catch. You can't be truly known if you're always managing perception. You can't be deeply loved if you're always editing yourself to avoid rejection. You can't belong if you're constantly performing to fit in. So why do you keep doing it? Because the fear runs deep. The fear that if you stop pleasing, you'll be left behind. That if you stop agreeing, you'll be excluded. That if you show up with your raw, unfiltered self, people will flinch. This is the emotional inheritance of the nice person. A chronic anxiety that your worth is conditional. That love is something you must continuously earn through sacrifice. That your presence is acceptable only when it's easy. And society reinforces this at every turn. Workplaces reward those who never complain. Families praise those who always show up. Friend groups gravitate toward those who never make it about them. You're told you're strong because you never break down. You're called kind because you let things slide. You're seen as mature because you don't make a fuss. But you're not okay. Not really. You've just become a master of hiding it. And the worst part? You don't even realize how much you're holding in until it starts leaking out. You wake up irritable. You start resenting the people you love. You fantasize about disappearing, not because you want to die, but because you're exhausted from living a life that doesn't feel like yours. This is what happens when your nervous system has been trained to prioritize other people's needs over your own. You forget how to recognize your own pain until it screams. You forget how to rest until you collapse. You forget how to say no until the yes becomes unbearable. Carl Jung would say that your shadow is knocking, not to hurt you, but to free you. The parts of you that you pushed away, the anger, the hunger, the voice, they're not there to destroy your relationships. They're there to make them real. Because connection without honesty is not intimacy. It's just coexistence. You don't need to be feared, but you do need to be felt. You don't need to be difficult, but you do need to be human. And being human means sometimes being inconvenient. Not because you're broken, but because you matter. So what do? You start small. You start by noticing the moments where your smile feels forced. The times when your yes feels heavy. The days when you're praised for being nice, but you feel invisible. You start by recognizing the cost of your compliance. You ask, who benefits from me staying silent? And who do I become when I stop? These are not easy questions. They might undo you, but sometimes undoing is the most honest kind of growth, because the version of you that's been trained to be liked is not the full story. It's a chapter, a survival strategy, a mask you wore to stay safe. But you're not in danger anymore, not in the way you were, and maybe it's time to write something new, something messier, something real. No more contorting yourself into shapes that others find comfortable. No more shrinking your needs to keep the peace. No more smiling through pain and calling it strength. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to be complex. You are allowed to be a full human being, not a support character in everyone else's story. And maybe, just maybe, being real is safer than being nice ever was. When you finally choose yourself, it's strange at first. Choosing yourself. After a lifetime of being everyone else's emotional caretaker, advocate, sidekick, it feels like betrayal. Not betrayal of others, betrayal of the image you've carefully constructed. The one everyone depended on, the reliable one, the calm one, the one who never causes trouble. You've built your whole sense of worth around this identity, and now you're walking away from it. It feels like setting fire to your own house and standing in the ashes thinking, what now? Because here's the truth no one tells you. When you start choosing yourself, your world doesn't immediately get better. It gets louder. People push back. They notice you're not as flexible as you used to be. You're not as sweet. You've started saying things like, I'm not available, or that doesn't work for me, and they don't know what to do with that. You used to bend so easily. Now you stand still, and it's unsettling, not just to them, to you too. You second-guess yourself constantly. Did I go too far? Was that selfish? Maybe I should have just let it go. You replay moments where you spoke your mind and your brain whispers, they'll leave you now. That old fear of abandonment flares up because you remember, deep in your body, what it felt like to disappoint someone and lose their warmth. You'd rather be uncomfortable than unloved. But now, something has shifted. Now the discomfort of self-abandonment is louder than the fear of rejection. You start to notice the subtle ways you used to disappear. Laughing at things that weren't funny. Agreeing when you didn't mean it. Offering help you didn't want to give. Saying yes while screaming no in your head. These tiny betrayals added up over time. They became the architecture of your relationships. And as you start to pull them down, you realize how fragile those connections really were. How much of your closeness was actually built on your ability to suppress yourself. And it's not all bad. Some people surprise you, some stay. They meet the new you, the one who's honest, direct, whole, and they don't flinch. In fact, they lean in. They say things like, thank you for telling me, or I didn't know you felt that way. You realize with relief and grief that it was never about being nice. It was about being afraid. And now that you're facing the fear, what you get in return is real. Messy, maybe, but real. Other people drift away, and it stings. Not because you want them back, but because it confirms your deepest suspicion. They loved the version of you that made their life easier, not the one who told the truth. And now that you're no longer cushioning their discomfort, they retreat. That hurts, but it also frees you. You stop investing in people who only valued your silence. You stop confusing tolerance for intimacy. You learn that being chosen means nothing if you're not being seen. And you start rebuilding, slowly, awkwardly. You make room for your own voice again. You ask yourself what you need, not what you can offer. You take time before saying yes. You sit in the awkward silence instead of filling it with apology. You let people misunderstand you. You stop over-explaining. You let your no be a complete sentence. Not out of defiance, but out of respect. Respect for your time, your energy, your aliveness. And you begin to feel something you haven't felt in a long time, peace. Not the fragile peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the grounded peace of being aligned with yourself. It's unfamiliar at first, almost boring. Because when you're used to running on other people's emotions, calm can feel like emptiness. But it's not empty, it's space. Space to breathe, to think, to feel, to exist outside the expectations you used to carry like bricks in your chest. This is what choosing yourself looks like. Not dramatic declarations or viral epiphanies, just small moments of honesty, quiet refusals, gentle boundaries, and yes, sometimes loneliness. Because breaking free from performative niceness means losing some of the conditional love that came with it. But in that loss, there's an opening for real connection, for the kind of love that doesn't ask you to disappear. And slowly, you begin to trust that you can be fully yourself and still be worthy of care. That your presence doesn't need to be earned, that your needs aren't burdens, that your truth is not too sharp to be held. You start to speak more freely, laugh more genuinely, cry without shame, rest without guilt. You reclaim parts of yourself that you forgot existed. The messy parts, the loud parts, the soft, scared parts. They all come back to the surface like old friends. Not perfect, not polished, but yours. And maybe you don't have it all figured out. Maybe you're still learning what it means to be real after years of being nice. But you're on your way, and that's something. That's everything. The cost of disappearing. There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who only know the edited version of you, the agreeable version, the pleasant shadow. You smile, you nod, you give, and somewhere in the middle of all that, you vanish, slowly, quietly. So slowly, in fact, that no one, not even you, hears the sound of you fading, but you feel it, in the pit of your stomach, in the tension in your jaw, in the way your laughter feels slightly off-key. You tell yourself it's nothing, that you're just tired, that you're just being dramatic. But what if you're not? What if that ache you keep ignoring is the only honest thing left in the room? What if being nice isn't harmless? What if it's the slowest form of self-abandonment? And what if the real danger isn't that other people won't love you when you stop performing, but that you won't even recognize yourself? Maybe the point was never to be liked. Maybe the point was to be alive, fully, unevenly, truthfully. Not agreeable, not easy, not digestible, just human. That's a hard thing to become when you've been trained to please. But maybe tonight that ache inside you, the one you've been ignoring, isn't asking you to be nicer. Maybe it's begging you to come home.